we need to talk about land decks.
I'm Mia, and I like a tasteful amount of land destruction.
I'm BZ. I like a heaping helping of land destruction. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you like land destruction, not destroying lands, playing lands, finding lands, you can find all the cards that do those things at Card Kingdom for a good price.
They have everything from Armageddon to just like normal generous gift for target permanents. Go there, use the link, tell them we sent you. It helps the channel.
It's a great way to support the channel, actually.
We're also sponsored by Dragon Chill, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order. That is sleeves, that is boxes, that is binders, that is a little bit of every accessory that you might need.
We're also sponsored by Moxfield. If you think that you know where the ad's going to be for Moxfield, you're a liar. That's plain and simple. And if you want to check out more Nerds content that you're not seeing on YouTube, you can go to Patreon and see what we have to offer. It's a great way to support the channel directly. So this is an interesting video because it's kind of just like a problem that has been more and more obvious as Magic goes along and as Commander gets more popular. What is the problem? It's that land decks have a large inherent advantage in Commander. They are playing powerful, strong lands that sort of demand specific answers. There's not a lot of removal that even exists that hits lands. And we're talking about lands like Nykthos, making mana for your Devotion, Cabal Coffers, making mana for your Swamps, Field of the Dead, the best land ever, making 2/2 zombies, and like Valakut, they all sit and play and they deal damage, they make tokens, they give you continuous advantage.
I think it's a point where the land tutors that you can play, they just aren't stopped. People are like, oh yeah, you can go get a land, and they're more acceptable than any other type of tutor, like your worldly tutor or something. People are way more like willing to stop that than your scape shift.
Yeah, so you're going to see a lot of the best lands that we just mentioned more often because, well, my mono black deck, I have to play Expedition Map to go find this. So I have to play Crop Rotation. I have to play Template Discovery to go get Field of the Dead, and it just means that you're going to see these every game. So it becomes a very present problem of like this threat is going to be presented every single game. And if you can't remove the lands, they're really hard to beat. That's why I like Field of the Dead so much. I like it because it's silly. It's super strong. Making 2/2s whenever I do anything makes it so that I have chump blockers. I have attackers. I can sacrifice them. I can attack if I draw an overrun. It's that much better. It's just, and if you can't remove that, because like we said, there's only a handful of spells that are like very playable, that like a spot removal spell that can also hit lands. So if you can't kill it, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna make 25 extra zombies this game.
You can't just cram pack your deck full of destroy target permanent because that gets very expensive. Or it's just not acceptable. You know, people don't like it when you hit their lands, but it's become such a taboo in this point to where it's just like weirdly like you should not be doing it. You could board wipe any other type of card. You could be board wiping with Blasphemous Act. You could be hitting all artifacts with Austere Command or Farewell, or you could be hitting people's graveyards with Bojuka Bog. But it seems that with lands, obviously it's like people don't want you to Armageddon or use Ravages despite it being reprinted, but it's just so much more unacceptable to do that rather than wiping any other type of archetype.
And this is not for no reason. The lands are a fundamental resource in the game, so destroying all lands kind of takes that away, and I think it does break the social contract. So we are not in any way advocating for Armageddon. We will get into that card later, but destroying all lands, it adds this other wrinkle too. If I destroy all artifacts, the artifact player is screwed. They got to figure something out. But if I destroy all lands, we're probably talking about extending the game for a very large amount of time, unless I'm already winning, in which case a lot of those board states you would win anyway. I don't know if lands factor in every single time. So we've got like, we're allowed to play artifact decks, and we're also allowed to play artifact wipes. You know, a Vandal Blast, it ruins your whole deck, but that's not generally frowned upon. But we can't really port that over to the land side because that interacts with a different part of the game. It changes the entire length of the game. But we also don't want to just give the land players free wins. I don't want to just throw my hands up when someone plays a Field of the Dead and go, well, I guess I'm probably going to lose. Or Cabal Coffers into Cabal Stronghold. I guess we have to arch enemy this player and probably can't beat their Exsanguinate next turn. I don't want to just, give up.
There is a point. It's like we don't, as BZ was talking about, we don't want Armageddon. We don't want Blood Moon or Back to Basics because these aren't generically good cards that you can cram into any deck, and they're dead if you're not playing against a landfall deck unless you have something that can actually benefit you, like if you play Armageddon but you have Teferi's Protection or you have like Avacyn out. But that is such a specific niche case that we don't want to be playing these in any decks that can just run them.
Yeah, they slow down games, they shut down all decks really, and they don't contribute to fun. So honestly, they're just more problematic than the actual lands decks. Taking a couple extra L's against lands, I'd rather do that than destroy every land every game. So that's also not the solution. So we are not going to advocate for that. But I think one thing that we are going to advocate for, it's not Moxfield yet. It's our new playmats. We are doing a Whatnot drop of these playmats. You can see the amazing Queen Meow Chessa Amber mat, and as well as the Displacer Kitten Miso mat. We are serializing 100 of each of these and stamping them with the paw print of the cat that's on the mat to go live to drop them. Whatnot Thursday, May 2nd at 8 p.m.
We know that you need playmats. It matters. And these are very good quality. They are stitched on the edges. They are super thick. They are good for your cards. And they have cute cats. And if you don't like cats, we also have one with our logo that we will sign. If you want to collect all 4 signatures for both cats and both Beezy and I, you can get all 3. And they will be on Whatnot. We're really excited to roll these out to you guys. This is our first ever merch drop. So if you want to go check it out, we'd really appreciate it. It helps their college funds.
Such a good way to support the channel. All the money from this is just going to go right back into making the channel great and better. And I just think this is really, really cool. We spent months sort of like brewing this and making sure the right playmat quality and make sure they were like thick enough and high enough quality that like we would get these mats, and we're super happy with them. So we're super excited to share them with you, and you can get $15 off if you haven't signed up for Whatnot yet. Just go to our link in the description, use our referral, and you get $15 off of these mats. If that's all you care about, just get a $15 discount on it.
And if you've already signed up for Whatnot, you can bookmark our show.
All right, so we've established a couple things. Land decks are really, really strong. It's hard to interact with their cards that are going to be consistently winning them the game. And we don't want to just blow up all lands because that sort of ruins the fun of the table. And it's not really something, unless we can somehow agree to it beforehand, that we can just go to an LGS randomly. So how can we compete with the lands decks without destroying all the lands and resetting the game over and over? I'd say the first way, we can reduce the number of lands without removing all of the lands. This is definitely an option, and there's a few cards that will do this.
That one of them is Urza Silex. Basically, the main point that we're using it for here is each player chooses 6 lands they control, and they destroy all other permanents only at sorcery speed. There is another mode where it's put exile, doesn't really matter, we don't really care about that. But 6 lands really reduces the amount of utility lands that your opponents might be playing, and it's not to the point where it's so unrecoverable from that people can't rebuild.
Yeah, this lets you play more Magic. After this resolves and the board is wiped, you get 6 lands to work with, which is actually probably about the number that you would have had when we wiped. So like when I wipe with Urza Silex, we're going to be in the middle turns of the game to the late turns. So maybe the normal decks that don't have like Cultivate and stuff in them, they're going to be at like 6 to 8 lands, but maybe the green deck's at like 14 lands. It's like, well, this card, for not a ton of mana, it is a board wipe, so it kind of gets your mana's worth, resets that hard to interact with resource without making everybody feel like all of their actions up to that point didn't matter. It's like, okay, green player, get back down to our level. We're going to go back to a nice 6. And I think it's so much different. It's so much different than destroying all of the lands.
It's a little bit rough because each player chooses it. So if they have a Nykthos and they have a Cabal Coffers and, some of the really juicy lands, you can't exactly spot remove those. But that's okay because the next card, Wave of Vitriol, really helps with that because each player stacks all artifacts, enchantments, and non-basic lands they control, and you find basics and you put them onto the battlefield. So all those utility lands will be gone and they'll have to find basics to replace them instead.
Yes, this is a way to sort of paint the board, paint with a brush, and turn every land into a basic land. This is not the same problem as like Blood Moon, where now your deck just, these lands make mana that you can't use. It's like, okay, whatever version of Mountain, right? Whatever basic land, you can go get that many. This can hurt like greedy 5-color decks that don't play a lot of basics, but I haven't really seen this card be so backbreaking where someone ends up with like 2 lands in play. Usually, minimum, probably you've got like 5 basics in play now, and this is a great board wipe for artifacts and enchantments as well. So this takes those decks, get them out of here. Let's reset all of the wild growths and the enchantments and the Mirari's Wakes and the Rhystic Studies and the Mana Rocks, and let's go get basics. Just fair, honest Magic. And of course, you playing this card, you're probably in heavy basics for your deck, so it doesn't really matter for you.
This would mess me up so badly. I do love my utility lands, and I love playing 4 and 5 color decks. So this this will really hurt the 4 and 5 color players because they need so many colors to activate their like mana cost. There's also From the Ashes. You destroy all non-basic lands, another thing that will absolutely kill me. And then you find basics again.
It's just the land part of Wave of Vitriol.
Yeah, so this is 4 mana though, so it is less than Wave of Vitriol, and it is in red. So that's kind of like odd to see it in red.
I really don't think, after playing all these games and against all these land decks, I really don't think it's unreasonable to put these cards in your deck. I don't think this has anywhere close to the stigma and the feel bads of Blood Moon, especially when people see it work and you go, we need a removal spell for that Cabal Coffer. It's like, I got you. It's gone now. And that Keswick Wolfrun is gone, and that Field of the Dead over there is gone, and your Nykthos is gone. And now we get basics. And maybe one person in the very late game gets capped on basics, and they're down to 6 lands. That's fine. I think having weaknesses to your deck is okay. Your deck having 5 basic lands in it because it's 4 colors, sometimes cards will resolve that make that worse for you, but it doesn't set you back to 0.
I mean, it's just part of the game, right? Unfortunately, that's one of the struggles you're going to have to fight through, especially if people are more cognizant of land like base decks like winning more of the games because they're more untouchable than other types.
Right, and I don't see how that's any different from, an artifact player. They have 3 artifact lands that are indestructible in play. They got a bunch of mana rocks, and somebody fires off a farewell. Their board is gone. They're down to a couple lands because of the deck building decisions that they made, and I just think it sucks for them. But I think that just has to be something we're okay with happening 1% of the time.
It's just a consequence of the game.
Next one's kind of interesting. It's Magus of the Balance. 1 and a white for a 2/2, and you can pay 5 and sacrifice it to cast Balance, the spell Balance. But it says each player chooses the number of lands they control equal to the person with the fewest, then they sacrifice down to that number. It's also true for discarding cards and sacrificing creatures. Now, the reason Balance is banned is because it is a 2-mana sorcery that happens immediately. This card is a sorcery speed creature that you then have to untap with, that then also requires 5 mana. So there's not as many ways to cheat this out. What people would do with Balance was dump their hand out and then have 1 land or something. And then when they resolve Balance, everybody's hands go to 0. They have to go down to 1 land. But this is you probably have 4 to 5 lands in play. And in Commander, it's a little bit harder to just dump your entire hand because you can't guarantee that you have this card every time. So this one, I think, to me, might be one I go to sort of keep these land decks at bay and say that I got 6 lands. You have 20. Let's go back down to 6. And now you have to figure out how to come back from this blowout for you.
Honestly, Balance itself is a sweaty card, but this, since it takes 7 mana to get going and a full turn cycle, unless you can somehow give it haste, which is already a whole nother challenge in itself, I think this is pretty fair, especially if you're not playing in the higher powered, where people are just powering out their hands, as BZ said. So if you're playing the mid to low mid, this will reset everyone to a pretty fair amount of lands. The only problem would be if someone is getting land screwed, but then everyone is getting land screwed, so it puts out everyone on kind of a more equal playing field.
Yeah, that might be the only time, but then again, you don't have to activate this at that point. You can say, all right, we want this person to play. We can deal with the Field of the Dead for a few turns while you figure that out. So I want to practice what I preach. I think I'm going to try Magus to the Balance. I don't know about this next one, but I wanted to mention it because it is interesting. It's Disciple of Kalis Nin, 5 mana 3/4. Everybody chooses 5 permanents they control. Everything else phases out, and nothing can phase back in. So you're stuck with a very small selection of things. Some people will leave lands in play to try to kill this or something, but I think at least it is a road block, a speed bump for these lands decks that they're going to have to pick some lands and they're going to have to spend a turn or whatever, some resources killing this so they can get access to their 55 other lands.
I remember this was so hyped up, and it's just the point where I never see it anywhere, so I'm really interested to see actually how this plays out.
Could be a meta call. We also have awkwardly in green, Natural Balance, 2 green sorcery. Each player who controls 6 or more lands chooses 5 lands and sacrifices down to that. And then everybody who has less gets to go up to 5. So at the end of the day, I think everybody has 5 lands in play. So this actually fixes our balance problem from the Magus. And it says now everybody's at 5, period. Maybe they get to keep some of their 5 utility lands, but when you're down to 5 lands, can you keep Nykthos and Valakut? And then even then you only have 3 mountains, so you can't really trigger it. So I think this card also pretty appealing. It is in green, so you can't be the silly ramp deck, right? You have to be the person who's maybe playing some kind of off theme deck like that.
Glissa or something?
Yeah, like Glissa, some kind of other deck. I think it could be good, though. This card looks sick.
This is an incredibly fair card. This is fair Magic. So I would like to see it, though. usually when I'm playing green, it's always like mana dorks galore. So I'm not, so like maybe this would work then.
Yeah, but we don't have to take lands off the battlefield necessarily. I think another valid way to combat these decks is to just prevent the ramp from happening. And this to me has an entirely different feel than the cards we just mentioned, which are taking lands off. That might be slightly more of a feel bad, even though I think those cards individually are pretty reasonable. These ones, I don't know how someone can cast Cultivate when I have one of these cards out and be super mad. We have Shadow of Doubt. 2-mana hybrid instant. Players can't search libraries this turn. Draw a card. Kind of like a counterspell for these tutors and these land ramp spells and the cultivates and the Sky Shroud Claim. Other than, regular counter magic, you can't really counter like a Sky Shroud Claim once it happens. I like having this in my deck because it's just another way to sort of make this stuff stop, and it doesn't feel like, I think countering a ramp spell, if you get mad at that, that's really your problem.
I think this is pretty funny because it's just a one-time effect. It's just like, no, you in particular, you can't search your library right now. And
Nobody
then it replaces itself. No, I just mean the fact that it's not like a static ability. So I think that's pretty funny that you're just choosing to fire it off at that moment. But it's really good if they are looking for those game-winning lands. There are a few of them. Maze's End, for instance, it could really impact the game. Another one is Aven Mind Sensor. If opponents would search the library, they search the top 4 instead. They're probably not going to be finding what they're looking for unless they're looking for a basic, and even then it might be pretty slim.
Yeah, I think these cards are pretty fair, the ones that statically shut down searching, because searching is so powerful, especially when we're talking about tutors. They kind of, Terramorphic Expanse kind of catches a stray here, and it's like, we're not really trying to shut that down. There are a few cards that get worse that are just like, normal fair magic. Again, I don't know that I'm never going to play Even Mind Sensor because it might hit a Terramorphic Expanse one day. But I think Shadow of Doubt is a good answer to that, where it's very targeted and it doesn't stick in play forever, ruining someone's day. It's just like, I'm going to stop whatever tutor you're trying to do right now. Opposition Agent is right under the Even Mind Sensor, though. This stops all their searching. As long as it's out, you get the cards they were going to search for. You can find the best thing in their deck. Take it out. If they go Archdruid's Charm to search for a land, you go, nope, yoink. Field of the Dead is actually not in your deck anymore, and that is a hardcore way to stop that.
I mean, this just stops searches in general, so if they're looking for their Thoracle, you go, nope, I'll be taking that, and I'll be stealing it from you. There's also Confounding Conundrum. You get a card off of this, and when lands ETB under opponent's control, if they had another land ETB under their control, they return a land to their hand.
So yeah, when they're trying to go off and cultivate Sky Shroud Claim, that stuff's just not going to work. And this comes down really cheap and replaces itself, so it asks almost nothing of you, and it even counts for Devotion or Enchantress, that sort of thing, and it just says you're not going to be able to do this. It's going to break even. They're going to go to your hand. It's not like the spell does nothing. The cards just go to your hand, or some land in play goes to your hand.
This is only 2 mana too, so it can come down really quickly and just kind of set the tone for the game to be like, okay, land players, slow down.
I think it's time that we get this card back into circulation, because it's all play at first and people were like, I don't know. But I think with the power that land decks have, both ones that I've played and played against, I think we need this to just keep them in check. There's also Ashiok Dreamrender. I love this card. It can mill somebody, but it says they can't search. And it's not a permanent forever card because it can be attacked. So it's like more of a speed bump. It just says don't play this stuff. You have to wait 1 or 2 turns, and that 1 or 2 turns can be huge when they have to delay their Sky Shroud Claim until turn 6 or 7 instead of firing off on like turn 3.
It also exiles each opponent's graveyard if you -1 it, which can really help against like the Splendid Reclamation decks where people are sacking stuff if they're bringing back their Glacial Chasms, for instance. Get that out of here.
That's huge. It kind of hits them in 2 spots.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. And there's also Moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck.
We got you.
If you want to build a land deck, for instance, Yuma just came out. There are a lot of Yuma decks, and if you click on one, you could scroll down and see a bunch of other builds by other people to get your ideas flowing.
Yeah, you might say, well, now that this Nitpicking Nerds video is out, I've got people gunning for my utility lands, and they're going to try to, make it sure my deck doesn't have the most advantage going in. Well, I'm going to add this card and this card, and Moxfield, that's just the best way to do all that stuff.
I absolutely agree. We love building decks on there. If you want to check out our decks, go follow us and check out our profile.
Yes, so our next option here is not to destroy a handful of lands, and it's not to prevent lands from entering. We're going to remove problematic lands pinpoint style. We're going to start with Demolition Field. I love this card. You can sack it, destroy a non-basic land, and then you get a basic untapped, and they get a basic untapped. So it doesn't put anybody down lands, and it, in some cases, can fix you. But this is the most neutral. Turn 2 things into basics. Turn Demolition Field and whatever the best land is. This is a card I really never leave home without, especially in 1 and 2 color decks.
It's so good because it's not like people aren't afraid of being like, oh, you're going to destroy my only land. It's just like only a non-basic and it's so targeted and you have to pay 2 into it. So it's really, you only save it for that special occasion. Plus, it taps for colorless, so it's not like it's its only use.
And the best thing about it is that it doesn't take up a spell slot. Some people don't want to, like, eat their vegetables is the phrase. Like, it's easy to say that you want to play cards to slow down these land decks because it's a very popular strategy, but it's one thing to say, okay, what am I going to cut for it? This is cut a land, cut a different utility land.
Reliquary Tower.
Having this as an option, definitely huge, and it definitely comes up a lot.
Now that Amber's here, if you want to also eat your vegetables in the land slot, there's also Ghost Quarter. Basically the same thing, but only they get a basic and you have to sacrifice a land, but you don't have to pay mana into it, which is a little bit faster if you need it immediately.
And then we can go down to Strip Mine, which is nobody gets a land. There's no compensation. You lose a land, they lose a land. It's sort of an emergency situation because I don't want to go down a land as bad. Same with Ghost Quarter. But sometimes those situations come up where it's like, okay, fine. I'll lose a land. I won't be able to tap it for mana for the rest of the game. I lose access to it. But they lose this card that's going to make 30 mana right now, or this card that's generating zombies because it's just so freaking powerful.
It can be really important, and I definitely think that's a meta call which one of these you play, if any of them, if not all of them. I wouldn't recommend that. But it might be really important to you if you're playing against a lot of land decks. There's also a Volcanic Offering. You destroy a non-basic land you don't control, non-basic land of an opponent's choice you don't control, and then deal 7 damage to target creature you don't control, and 7 damage to target creature of opponent's choice you don't control. So you are never caught in the crossfire of this, which is really nice. And then a couple lands get destroyed and a couple creatures die too.
Yeah, as long as you can agree that there's some utility lands that need removing, this is a 4-for-1 in your favor. There is the worst case scenario that your opponents can pick the same non-basic land and the same creature, but that's usually only if you're winning, and then you still got a 2-for-1 out of it. You still hit the best thing, the best land and the best creature. So I think this is a pretty solid red card. Definitely fair for, oh, hi Amber, danger Amber. Definitely fair if you want to take out spells. I think removing a land from a player on turn 5 is not going to shut them out of the game for playing.
I think with 2 less creatures and 2 less lands, I think your opponents will be just fine. There's also Fulminator Age, 1 hybrid for a 2/2. If you sack it, you destroy a target non-basic land. I mean, this fits into the creature spot, so it's not as bad.
Yeah, I think this card is kind of bad. However, it is a card I have experimented with, and I think for what it does, it's actually pretty good. So I think if you're looking for ways to tax these utility lands, I think it's a pretty good inclusion, especially if you're like a sack deck, you're like graveyard centric, you care about the number of creatures. I just don't think it's a great card for the decks that I were playing in. I was playing it in like a political deck where I was going, if you attack me, I'll blow up one of your lands. Which is a pretty good threat, but it doesn't really fit what we're talking about right now.
When I think of political, I think of benevolence, not threatening.
Oh, okay. So like, how about my hostility deck?
Okay, well that's just your personality, but
it really is.
There's all, if you don't want to remove them by destroying them, how about removing them by trapping them? There's Spreading Seas, which makes things islands, Lithiform Blight, loses abilities and can tap for a rainbow, or Cleansing Wildfire, which destroys and replaces your land. So it's a little bit of trapping your land or destroying it, but you get one back. So it's not as bad, but it's not the land you thought you got.
Yeah, the thing about these is that makes them so playable is that they all draw a card when you play them. And Cleansing Wildfire can actually be used for you. If you have indestructible lands, you can destroy it and treat it as a red rampant growth that draws you a card, which is super cool. I love this card. And I'm totally fine. I don't lose any cards. I don't really lose tempo. I can just spend 2 mana on an off turn to take out Valakut, take out Field of the Dead, take out Maze's End, mess you up for sure. You got to scramble to figure out how you're going to get that back now. And then I just get to draw a card, and I feel like I haven't really spent a ton. And so it's a great way for me to just catch up to these decks that are going to be spamming the same annoying lands. The next option in our lands are too powerful, let's do something about it toolkit, punishing utility lands. We don't have to look at the land count as a whole. We can talk about destroying, but this is a little bit different. It doesn't really remove the lands. It just punishes them for playing them in the first place. And a really weird one that's kind of doing some stonks lately, Sabo's Web. You probably haven't even heard of this. 2-mana artifact, ETB draw card. And then each land with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability doesn't untap. So now this is a hurdle you have to jump over to get your Nykthos and your Cabal Coffers and your whatever else is, your Kesting Wolf runs. You got to kill this thing. They're going to be kind of innate and useless, or kind of a one-time use when this thing's out.
There are so many lands that do really amazing things, like the castles, for instance, or just like War Room that are such free rolls to put into your deck. So this just completely shuts them out. You do play it turn 2 and you can draw a card. Does a little bit of everything.
And certainly not on the level of Back to Basics or Winter War. We are not in that unfun zone.
It's not right.
I also really like Price of Progress. This is a totally different axis to attack on. It's 1 in a red instant, deals damage to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands they control. If you want to ramp to get 15 lands in play and they're all non-basics and they're all shock lands and they're all Field of the Dead stuff, I can put this card in my deck, and now when I draw it, when I find it, when I look for it, boom, you take 30. Maybe I take 6 and the other players take 10. It's a big burn spell, but you're done if you're playing a million utility lands.
I mean, this is just a big life swing. I would only recommend this in 1 or maybe even 2 color decks because you're going to be playing a lot of utility lands if not. But for the price of 2 mana, it's at instant speed too. That's amazing. I think that it can just really just end the game right there.
I think pressuring their life totals, perfectly reasonable. This next card is a little fringe, is definitely a weirdo, but I think if land decks are getting you down, this is a card I would look at. It's Toxicrene, 3 green, 2/4 reach, death touch. Those are like okay stats. It's pretty good at defending. But all lands have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and lose all other abilities. We are making mana. You are color fixed, but nothing else. No funny business, please.
I first looked at this, I was like, what if Chromatic Lantern was evil, though? That's like the first thing I thought of when I saw this. This could be playable. I mean, again, a meta call. But this is like not bad. It's a pretty good blocker because it has Death Touch and Reach. And if you are just playing a lot of basics, then it might not even hurt you.
Okay, evil Chromatic Lantern is ridiculous, and I love that now. I just want to play this more so I can say, I'll play evil Chromatic Lantern. And next we have Blood Sun, not Blood Moon. Blood Moon's Sun. It's 2 in a red for an enchantment. When Blood Sun enters the battlefield, draw a card, so it replaces itself, and all lands lose all abilities except mana abilities. So kind of a slightly better version of Toxicrene, but it's a different color. So this is going to say, no, you're not pumping, you're not doing all this stuff. The one thing it doesn't do is it does keep mana abilities. So like Nykthos is still making a bunch of mana, and Cabal Coffers is still making mana, because those are mana abilities. But the rest of this nonsense, the utility, the pumping, the triggers when lands enter, those are gone, and we're happy to have them gone.
I mean, I think I'm most afraid of mana abilities, I think, in the long run, but this, in general, it's not bad to nuke the other abilities of lands. I think that those are some of the really scary ones. I mean, maybe it's just because I play against Field of the Dead so much.
Every once in a while.
But those are very scary, and in the land slot, they're almost uninteractable. Is that a word?
It is a word, and if you want to see more Nitpicking Nerd stuff, this video is actually going to be, I'm going to have YouTube recommend whatever video is the best for you personally. So I think you just have to click on it. It's going to be good for you.
Buy or play Mets.